civilian. Okay, I guess
Sorry.
I'm supposed to say got it. Got it. Uh, then I spent 3 years as a member of the Ontario Civilian Commission on Police Services, which brought me face to face many years ago with some of the issues around policing that have not gone away and in fact have become compounded since then. And then I took some time off, went back to university to do what I had come initially in 50 years ago to do, which was to get a PhD. I went back to university as a mature student and got my PhD. But I guess I was not fated to be idle because a year and a half after getting my PhD, I got appointed to the Toronto Police Services Board in 2005. And little did I know then that it will be a long stretch. I spent 10 years from 2005 to 2015 as chair of the Toronto Police Services Board, which included some momentous occasions when it comes to policing this city. I'm sure most of you will remember the infamous piece of policing history, namely the policing of G20 summit in Toronto. And what we saw the police do, we did not like. And in fact, it made us very, very concerned about the police. One of many things that happened then, the cost of policing. We are spending over $1 billion on policing. When Irwin mentioned young people that he worked with, when young people don't have the services they need, when people in need of good health services, people with mental health crises, are being turned over to the police rather than having access to medical care. We are watching the homeless being made into policing problem as opposed to a housing, affordable housing problem, a political, social policy issue. We are seeing many other areas where what we need is good government policies and programs and funding. And instead, what we are seeing is all those issues being turned over to the police. So in 2018, after those 10 years at the helm of Toronto Police, I wrote a book called Excessive Force, Toronto's Fight to Reform City Policing. And I spent 2.5 to 3 years teaching at Ryerson as a distinguished visiting professor. I should add one other piece very quickly. Before all of this, I spent 10 years at the Toronto Board of Education as a community relations worker and then as the board's advisor on race relations. And so working with young people, thinking about how education is fundamental to them, how access to good, bias-free, quality, accessible education matters for the future of our young people and our families was my very first engagement in public service. So it's been a long stretch, and I feel grateful for all the opportunities that came my way to give back to the community, which has been wonderful for us as a family to raise a child, find a place, sink roots, and so on. So this is my last gig talking about politics. based upon the things that I learned along the way of all these various engagements over the last several decades. And I'm looking forward to our conversation about renewal of democracy this evening. So thank you, Irwin, for the opportunity.
Oh my. Now I always hated when I had to speak after somebody who is much smarter than me and more eloquent, but I set it up myself, so I only have myself to blame. So thank you, Alok. I'm looking forward to your comments in a minute. I just wanted to tell people why, as you did, it's so obvious why you are so interested in democracy and this idea that we can use your lived experience and not just now but ongoing way to figure out how to make things better, because that lived experience with your intellect is such a rich source of knowledge that is going to be very helpful now and I think moving forward. At least if I have any say in it, and I hope to, as you know. Uh, I got interested in this conversation because when I was an officer of the legislature, as a child advocate for 12 years, I got to see how politics really works, how politicians work. I got to know them. I got to see what the legislature's struggles were. And then I also got to see how the bureaucracy works and how they make decisions and how that interfaces. And then I got to understand, because I was responsible for making sure the voices of children and youth who were marginalized were heard by these people. And I got to see how the public, and if you feel those children and youth were the public interfaces with this bureaucracy and this political system that is actually supposed to serve them. And I can tell you, and I guess we'll talk a little about it, it doesn't work well. And then as I left, I realized that, I probably was pretty cynical. And I don't think I was different, and I am different even today, as majority of Ontarians. It's actually true about any liberal democracy anywhere in the world. If you look up the word trust and find a study about trust in those societies, those communities, the bottom rung of who will be trusted in any liberal democracy is a politician. That's true. And now I'm one, I guess, because I try to say, well, I'm not elected, but people tell me, no, you're a politician if you're running. So now I'm one. And most people in liberal democracies believe there's no difference between the parties, that parties say one thing and never deliver, that it's a system about self-interest, that people promise a lot and nothing ever changes. Almost every survey and certainly in Ontario, that's no different. When I go to the door, it is no different. That's a problem, especially when I look across the border, and I did, and I'm talking about why did I run? Because I look across the border and I see what's happening, and I see that, yeah, this system that I saw that isn't working is pretty fragile, and I worry about losing it, because yeah, I'm pretty cynical about it. But unless we try and one, name the problem, and then as young people used to tell me, what are you going to do about it, buddy? Figure out what we're going to do about it and do something to shore it up, we will lose it. And I'd rather lose it intentionally than unintentionally. So my mom, I said this before, my mom used to say, Irwin, you can, you don't have the responsibility of changing the whole world. So I'm not talking here and why am I running or what can we do that we're going to save democracy. For all liberal democracies around, Irwin, that's not your burden. You cannot expect that of yourself. It's not, you're not going to be able to do that. But she would also add, Irwin, you're not exempt from trying. And that's why I'm here. That's why I wanted to talk about this. Even if the party isn't, even if nobody else is. Um, because the things I just said earlier about trust, about the system not working in the way we expect it to work, in the way it was written down to work, this is not news to anybody. It's not news to the politicians. It's not news to the bureaucrats. They will agree. So for me, it's like, okay, then what are we going to do about it? And that's what I want to talk about a little today. And that's how I came to that discussion. But I'm going to be quiet. And what I thought we would do is, Alok, if you could take some time and tell us some of your initial thoughts about what you wanted to bring to a discussion. I know where I'm coming at it from. You'll come at it from a different way. I expect other people here will have their own thoughts and things they want to talk about. If you could do that, I'll give some thoughts and then we can open it up to both questions and comments. And if we do questions and comments, I'd say to people, keep your comments to tops 3 minutes. I told Karika hard stop on people's comments when we get to there so that if anybody wants to talk, there's time, and certainly ask questions of me and Alok. So that's how we're going to run it. And I'll turn it over to you, Alok, to let us know what you're thinking.
Yeah, I'll just begin with some very preliminary comments, and then we can go from there. And I'm more interested in hearing what everybody else in this room is thinking. My comments are partly based on looking at the world, which now I have the luxury of doing now that I'm retired, and partly based on my brief foray into electoral politics. Irwin mentioned that. After it was all over, in 2019, it was suggested that I might consider standing for election, and that was the federal election, and I was nominated to run for the NDP in Trinity St. Paul's riding. It was quite an experience. I had canvassed for candidates before. I had gone door knocking during municipal elections and provincial and federal elections, but never been a candidate myself. I had avoided doing that, but this time I succumbed to the call. And it was very revealing. Trinity St. Paul's is seen, and I should say, of course, I did not win because we have an incumbent who is probably one of the oldest serving members of the parliament, who has a stronghold on this riding. People joke, even she herself jokes, that she has delivered just about every child who is now of voting age, when she used to be a family physician before entering politics. However, um, it was gratifying to see the level of support that uh, I did get from this riding. It was one of the better performances in the city in a federal election. But more than that, what did it tell me? It told me that this is a riding which is marked by extremes. On the one hand, it has neighborhoods that are super wealthy, that have these monster homes, that have their backyards overlooking this gorgeous ravine, the Cedarville Park. And on the other hand, this riding has the second largest population of renters in the province. And as I walked up and down the old apartment buildings where they live, and if you take a walk around across Vaughan Road, you will see them. They are 4 or 5 story buildings. They're very old. If you go inside them, you find some of them are in decrepit condition. People are living there. They have no voice. There are people who are paying the majority of their single moms with two children, paying majority of their monthly income in rent to be able to have a small apartment where they live with two teenage children. They can barely feed them because their money is going mostly in rent. And there were many, many other issues. The number of elderly living in this riding is pretty high. Number of people who cannot afford to get dental care because they don't have the money, they don't have coverage, is quite substantial. So, on the one hand, extreme wealth, on the other hand, widespread poverty in this riding. And they have very little voice. Uh, Also, their turnout at the elections, even though they had long conversations with me as a candidate, but their turnout in the elections is also quite low because of mobility issues, because of access issues, because of motivation. Many of them have given up. They don't think that the political system speaks for them, represents them, cares for them. So, what's the point? So when we talk about democracy renewal, we also have to talk about democracy deficit. And there are, of course, the big ticket items when we talk about democracy deficit. We are all reading and hearing about what's going on in Wet'suwet'en territory, where significant number of indigenous people are concerned about maintaining their way of life and their living. There is significant presence of climate crisis activists who are concerned about continued investment in fossil fuel. So there are big ticket items. And the government, rather than sitting down to negotiate and find a resolution with them, what does the government do? In the interest of the corporation that is building the gas pipeline, the government sends in the RCMP, which is acting in a very brutal way. That to me is a sign of democracy deficit. I look across to the UK that prides itself about its parliamentary democracy. As we speak, there's a bill going through the parliament which will attack one of the basic rights of citizens, the right to express dissent. There's a bill going through the House that will make it illegal to engage in protests on certain types of issues. It will bar certain people from participating in protests. Then I look across further to the country I came from, to Canada, India, the largest democracy in the world. As we speak, people who have expressed disagreement with the government over its economic policy, whether over its handling of COVID-19, over its treatment of the rights of minorities, they are in jail. They have been charged with sedition for criticizing the government. They are being held without a trial. They are being denied bail by the courts. Why? Because they have expressed disagreement. They have tried to hold the government accountable. So parliamentary democracy, the liberal democracy that Irwin talked about, appears to be going through a rather disturbing phase, and we are not exempt from it in Canada. What we are seeing is a system that has developed in country after country, and certainly in Canada, where all that counts is not the level of support that a party has among the public in order to be the governing party, but the number of seats it has in the legislature, be it a provincial legislature or federal legislature, in order to be able to form government. And what that does do, parties with 35 to 40% of popular vote wield excessive power and don't feel that they have to hold themselves answerable to the citizens of the country, don't feel that they have to represent and take into account the broader public interest, because the parties are also, especially um, in the absence of um, adequate, sufficient state funding of the political process. Parties are dependent on raising money, and raising money also carries its own price. So, democracy renewal for me is about thinking of ways in which we can do whatever it takes to make our system, our political system, truly rooted in the public of the country, truly representative of those who it purports to serve, truly answerable to the country, not a segment of the country, not the most powerful voices in the country, not the most organized sector of the country, and truly sensitive, more than sensitive, to the needs of the weakest sections of the public. I would like to see policy making in government start from the bottom up by asking what would be the effect of the public on those who are the least powerful in our society. Now, we had a big push some years ago, and we even thought we had a promise from our current prime minister for electoral reform, to move towards proportional um, um, representation. It didn't happen. It was dismissed rather in a cavalier fashion by the same prime minister who made the promise, on the basis that there was no appetite for it in the country. Well, how he came to that conclusion, we don't know. But I'll just finish with one small idea. How representative, responsive, answerable to the public our political system is depends on how our parties function, let alone the legislative changes, the electoral reforms, etc. But how do our parties even function besides raising millions of dollars? And what I came to feel from my brief journey into electoral politics as an NDP candidate is that we say we have a system of grassroots politics. All the parties have a riding or a constituency based base, call it a riding association or a constituency association or whatever. But for the most part, in between elections, they lay dormant. They have executives, that meet once in a while, to elect a delegate to the party convention, uh, to discuss maybe a resolution that they will take form. But there's no connection between the association, which is the base of, which ought to be the base of the party, and the community where the association is located. And if I could end with one suggestion, it is that we need to push our parties, and certainly the party that Irwin and I belong to say you need to strengthen and make truly meaningful that base, that lowest unit of your public presence. Make it meaningful in terms of resourcing them properly, making them active, requiring that they are connected and visibly present in the communities where they are located, the ridings or the constituencies where they are located, that they are involved in the life of those communities. They are engaged in bringing to the attention of other layers of their political structure the issues and concerns that nobody else is paying attention to. And for the party to make sure that the voice and the input coming from that base uh, plays an influential role in the development of policies that are then taken forward in legislative advocacy, debates, proposals, and so on. So democracy renewal to me is a big subject. And given that we are a multi-party form of liberal democracy, I believe that while we wait and fight for and agitate for legislative reforms, there are certain things that is within our power to do that helps us connect with those among whom we are located and those to whom we would be going back once every 4 years or 3 years or whatever, looking for support. In between those years, I believe the parties should make themselves accountable to those whose votes we want by listening to them, by championing them, by working with them. And it is on the parties' shoulders, it is their responsibility to make sure that that base is strong, means something. To be a member of a riding association is not a symbolic act, is not a rubber stamping act, but something real, where people find meaning as volunteers. So I want to stop there, from democracy deficit to the base. That's basically my thinking right
Thank
now.
you, Alok.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Alok and I did not know what, he doesn't know what I'm going to say, I don't think. And I didn't know what he's going to say. That's how I roll, I guess. I'm so glad you're here because I agree with everything that you said. I'm curious what you'll think of what I'll say, and I won't take too much time because I want to hear what people here think of what we're saying. Um, I'm going to end up at the same place, start somewhere else, and that's that when I was watching the political process in the legislature, and even after I was the advocate, I watched this government, right, the Ford government, and whether it was the use of what they call omnibus bills and putting the whole kitchen sink in a bill so that nobody could find it. And in fact, the office I used to run just after I retired, which was closed, they repealed an act that was that had created my office. It was passed unanimously by the legislature, about 12 years before, they repealed the act that was unanimously passed in the middle of an omnibus bill that perhaps if we didn't speak up, people wouldn't have even noticed. And they continued to use this tool of an omnibus bill to avoid debate. And it's not new to them, the Liberals did it too. But then when they hold hearings, and they're supposed to hold legislative hearings on the bill, this government and former government gives a day's notice to the public to attend the hearings, sometimes even less, and 2 days to have the hearings, and then it's done. This is ridiculous. But it's also ridiculous to the MPs there because they don't actually get to work at looking at the bill, studying the bill. That's what's supposed to be, crafting the bill, thinking through, working collegially. In fact, when the Liberals had a select committee on residential care for adults with disabilities, I remember the report, and they put it out, and it was members of all the parties put out this report from that committee. They held hearings, they traveled together, all different parties. And that was at a time when the Liberals were in power, and certainly the Conservatives were not very happy with them. But the members of Parliament on that committee were very proud of the report. And the Liberals asked the Premier at the time, the Liberal Premier, Premier Wynne at the time, we want to stay together as a committee because we can do more work together. She wouldn't let them. She disbanded that committee. Why? Because they, in coming together and working together and putting out a report, they had some power to do something. Not power over, power to do something. And what if it wasn't what the Premier wanted? So that was that answer, and the committee system has even decayed more now under this government, with sometimes no hearings, no committees. The idea of question period, where for a time, and even today, but literally for a time, the government ministers were told not to answer a question. Use your key message, and now I know what key messages are. Use your key message. No matter what they ask you, don't answer it. Answer with your key message. Even if it's completely offside, doesn't have to do with the question. They had their own television station, do you remember? Where they put out their own media because they thought, well, the media wasn't telling a fair story, so they were going to do that. And at that television station, when they held the meetings, this government would force their staffers to go to the press conference and give standing ovations at the press conference in front of the media that happened to go there. And then they would tape it and put it out as if it's news. And this government, also a minister, threatened service providers. Go along or you're cut off. And a service provider had the guts to talk about it in the public. But that's not news. It's not just this one minister that was called out about that. This government used the notwithstanding clause more than once, more times than any other government, Ontario government in history, in the first 2 years. Appointment process, mandate letters, the letters that go to all the ministers that were made public, this government will not allow it to be made public. People like me have demanded that they are made public, gone to the privacy commissioner and said they should be public. The privacy commissioner decides, yes, they should. You can't withhold them, government. What do? They're still in court 4 years later, fighting against the decision of the privacy commissioner to make their mandate letters public. This government, and that's why I'm here, is so Trump-like to me in terms of how it abuses the legislature. When I left being the child advocate, I asked for an exit interview, and my bosses were the speaker of the legislature and the clerk of the legislature, the person in charge. I told them, you two are guardians of democracy. It's supposed to be our whole elected parliament that's the guardian, but you two actually are the guardians right now. And you know, I could go through the list, and there's much more. You know this is happening. You need to do something because you can't allow it to be eroded. And I said to them, and my suggestion was, and I will continue to suggest this, and if elected, I will push for it. It's again, I'm not making NDP policy, but as a sitting MPP, I will say there should be an all-party standing committee that looks at modernizing democracy and strengthening it. And I tell you it should be all-party because I believe that what I'm saying to you, the members of parliament agree. I tell you, the clerk and the speaker told me in my exit interview, Irwin, you're preaching to the choir. This is not an answer to me because they're in a position to do something. And so I believe if MPPs have a chance, they will agree with everything I'm saying about the legislative process. The Liberals, let me say, I recently watched this, and I want to say this about partisanship. It's okay. I'm not against partisanship because partisanship to me means ideas, right? And it's good to debate ideas. And certainly there are going to be people with different ideas. There are people with different ideas right here tonight. I'm sure of it. And that's okay. That's not partisanship. That's debating ideas. And I happen to be with a group of people, I hope, that have similar kinds of ideas. We're in the same ballpark, at least. So when I say what the Liberals said, their idea of renewing democracy is, oh, I know what we can do. We can do electoral reform. In fact, they decided which electoral reform to do, kind of, but they can't explain it. But okay, let's say they could. I'm not against electoral reform. I think it's really important for the reasons Alok mentioned. But if that's all we do, who does that affect? Politicians. What does that do for the people that Alok was talking about, who feel so removed from politicians, the political process? How does it change what politicians do in the legislature? It doesn't change it. But it's not surprising to me that that's the answer from liberals who are so sometimes, when I was studying political science, they were called the government party, the governing party. And that's because they have this sense, because they've been in power a lot in Ontario, across Canada, they have a sense that, yeah, we're the right people to govern. We know. We strike the balance, the middle ground. So they feel like they're the governing party. And what's happened, in my opinion, in the culture of the party is they can't see beyond that. So they can't think of anything to change except what they know, the system they know, the election system that affects them, that is about them, not us, not people. So they can't go deeper than that. And Lord knows they can think about it, but whether they'll do it, I don't know. But all I'm saying is elect reform, yes, but that can't be all. Now let me say what we can do and what I want to talk about in Irwin, because I agree so much about this disconnect between people who don't have their voices heard and the people who make decisions. And that's true. And when Alok, you were talking about St. Paul, when you talk about Don Valley West, it's the same vision, right? We've got North Toronto and the Bridle Path, and then we got Thorncliffe Park, where I did not know this till I met with the leaders in Thorncliffe Park. I knew there's a Muslim population in Thorncliffe Park and a newcomer population. They're telling me 40,000 Muslims live in that area. 40,000. This is some of the leaders in that community say the largest concentration of Muslim people in the world outside the Muslim world live in that area. Are their voices heard anywhere? Do the people in North Toronto who live in the same riding ever hear their voice? They're the same. They're supposed to be in the same riding and be a community. That's the purpose of a riding. You're together. But they don't talk to each other. Thorncliffe Park is a strong neighborhood. Leaside is a strong neighborhood. North Toronto is a strong neighborhood. Do they hear each other's voices? Never. Do they consider each other's voices? Never. So for me, it's like how do we use this campaign as an opportunity so the people in Thorncliffe, and for me, the kids in Thorncliffe, the women in Thorncliffe, the newcomers in Thorncliffe, however they want to talk about themselves, situate themselves, they have a voice and can speak, not me, they can speak at this point of election what they want, what they hope, what they dream, what they need, and they're speaking not just to Ontario, they're speaking to the other parts of the riding. You know what? I'm fine with North Toronto having a voice too. And I want them to hear each other because there is common ground. I believe it with my soul that most of the people that live in the riding, I believe in people. I believe in the goodness of people. I believe that most people would say, yeah, I want fairness. I want community. What our leaders said, what Tommy Douglas, J.S. Woodruff said, what I want for myself, what I desire for myself, I desire for all. I want them to talk to each other. And then when elected, I want those voices to be heard in the legislature, but directly. Like we did when we were advocate, where young people took over that legislature, ran their own hearings, where young people said to the clerk of the legislature, you have a committee on children's rights. Why not have children sit with the parliamentarians and run the hearings and create the law, craft the law? Well, we can't. And the young people said, why can't you? The answer, you won't be surprised, because that's not the way we do it. It's not acceptable. And when young people took over that legislature with their own hearings, when they held hearings, it influenced, it didn't, I wouldn't say it changed, it influenced that legislature. So now that was never done before, but now it can be done because it was done. So we can do that. The other thing is that, I've been reading about this idea of democracy, and there's two little things I thought of. One fits with the left, but there's this book by a guy named Dave Meslin, and he talks about committee hearings, and he uses a city example. So when people get called to a hearing, you get something printed in a newspaper that looks like this. Let me read it to you. An application has been filed to amend the City of Toronto zoning bylaw 43886 to permit a multi-mixed-use development, 8-story townhouse, 63 meters with podium size for 19.9 meters. The development would contain 513 residential units, retail uses at grade on the secondary levels. The residential lobby is proposed to be located at the southeast corner, blah, blah, blah. Statutory public meetings, file EA 12 23 58 22 STE 27 OZ hub. No, there's no hub. So this is supposed to tell you, and remember, you are the cream of the crop here. You are civically engaged. You're going to go speak to that committee about this. Can you imagine? Could they write that in any other way to deter people from going to that meeting? Could it be written in a better way to deter people? It would be like they purposely wrote this to ensure that not one human being would ever show up here, except maybe Oliver, who's on this call from my writing, because he understands this stuff, but most of us don't. It's ridiculous. And in my writing, when elected in Don, we will not do this. This is unacceptable. The other thing I think about, it was done once in Manitoba, if an elected MP gets elected, whether they're in government or not, they get to do private members' bills, right? You get to, it's like, what are you interested in? What can you put forward? There's rules about can't spend money. There's some rules. And the MPP gets his or her time, puts the private members' bill forward. It barely passes. Sometimes they do, but barely. But you get to put it on the floor and it gets to be debated. It's a topic that gets to be debated. Okay, in Don Valley West, like they did once in Manitoba, and certainly in Montreal, they have a right to initiative in the city government system. But in Don Valley West, the citizens of Don Valley West are going to create a private members bill. And we're going to have a system where they can vote. We're going to have a system of selection, asking for ideas for what the bill should be. We're going to have a civic way of creating it. We're going to have a plebiscite of some sort where people vote on which bill moves forward. And I know people are worried, right? You can mitigate the risk of what's the bill? What if it turns out to be a crazy bill? In Winnipeg, there was a bill about creating a maple flavored potato chip. It was one of the top choices by the jokers in the riding. Guess what? It didn't make it. Because as young people used to tell me when I had a group of young people and I worried what they were going to do and they were thinking about trying to challenge a government position on anything. This is not when I was advocating before. They used to say, Irwin, trust the group. We are going to trust Don Valley West. I know that if we create a process that engages everybody from top to bottom in that riding, and they have to come together with an idea, that idea will be just fine. It might not be the one that I would have put at the top on my list, but it will be just fine. And you know what? They will be stronger as a community and a riding because of that exercise. And we're going to do it. And so I want to leave you with that because that's my hope for trying to find ways of positively making things different and beginning to influence that, you know what, it's okay. Politicians, and I believe this, not just me, but probably any party, they're not mean-spirited people. Sometimes they've lost sight of the forest for the trees. They're not mean-spirited. And we need to find a way to open the system up so that they truly are working in partnership with the people that elect them. That's what I intend to do. So now, that was a big speech, but I want to hear what people have to say. I don't know if you have something to add to that, Alok, or tell me what a crazy idea I have, but go ahead.
No, just one thing very quickly. As you were talking about the last piece about having people bring proposals. We were in Scotland some years ago, and they have a parliamentary channel. So they broadcast the parliamentary proceedings non-stop. I found that they have a standing all-party committee of the Parliament of Scotland, which receives legislative proposals from ordinary people. And they don't have to be formatted or written in the language of a legislation, of a bill. Just a letter will do, outlining the concept or the idea. And the standing committee will go through all of those letters and pick one or two of the most interesting proposals and turn them into bills to take forward to the parliament. And they meet several times a year to solicit legislative proposals from ordinary citizens of Scotland. I thought that was a great creative process.
Let's do it.
Yeah. And they're doing it officially for the Parliament of Scotland.
Yep, I hear you. So I'm gonna ask Kaurika, I hope you're still with us. Yeah, I see you.
Yeah, I'm still here.
If anybody wants to make a statement, like ask a question, anything, remember, be kind, take your 3 minutes, and raise your hand so Kaurika can see you and unmute you. Does anybody have a comment or a question?
Oh,
I think Oliver's talking here. Let me just ask to unmute.
Oliver might not know how to raise his hand, but Oliver, did you want to say something? Wave your hand. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I'll wait.
No, go ahead, Oliver.
No.
You're good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody else? All right. Oh, Guy. Uh-oh. Guy never agrees with me most times. So go ahead, Guy. Wait, Guy, hold on. Can you unmute Guy Calrica?
I have to ask them to unmute. Yeah.
Okay, I unmuted. Is that good? Do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So I was interested in what Alok was saying when he was canvassing and he specifically mentioned on Vaughan Road. So that's close to my heart because I actually lived on Vaughan Road for a couple of years. And those 4 or 5 story buildings, I remember them very well. So he spoke to people there and shared with us some of the thoughts that they had about this. But my question is, how do we bring these people in? Because they have full lives, they have lots of responsibilities, they have lots of things that they have to get through in order to meet their day-to-day needs. So how do we make sure that their voices are not only heard, but we can bring them in and get their input? Because it's very hard for a lot of these people to actually become part of the political process when they have to meet a lot of stuff that, you know, some of us like me are very privileged to be able to have the time and the resources to get involved. But some of the people, like the people you're talking on Vaughan Road, are perhaps not as able to get themselves engaged. How do we engage them?
That's an excellent question, Guy. Um, and we saw what happened at the last federal election just a few months ago or a few weeks ago. Um, this time it was even worse because the polling booths were even more at a distance, and there were a lot of people who could not go that far. I wonder why it is impossible for the Elections Canada to have mini polling stations that are either, you know, in a cluster of 2 or 3 buildings so that people don't have to go too far. Because mobility was a big issue for a lot of those buildings. Don't have elevators. People have to take the stairs to go up and down. But if the polling booths were more close to them, and I don't know why we couldn't have a polling booth for a cluster of 2 or 3 buildings and no more. That whether that would encourage people, make it more easy for them to actually come out and cast their votes. Waiting time will be less, distance will be less, and the incentive to vote therefore will be higher. That's my thinking. There's no reason on earth why the polling booths have to be so far apart and so distant from people, and why they are not uh, set up keeping in mind the demographics of the area. That takes a bit of better planning and commitment from the Elections Canada.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Alok.
yeah, that's good. But Irwin, do you have any thoughts about that in terms not only about the polling booths, but also about, you know, when you talk to people at the door and they express their views and their concerns, and you want to engage with them and get them, you know, engaged in community actions, what do you think are some of the challenges there?
Well, it's the same. So here's what I think, because I use my experience with um, other kinds of activism, certainly in trying to organize young people. My assumption is this, is not that they won't, or that they don't want to, or that they're uninterested. So from my point of view, I wipe that idea out of my mind, because people used to use that about children and young people. Well, they're not interested. They just want to play their games. No, actually, they are. So those people that we find it hard to engage, we talk. It's we think we have to find ways of engaging them with us, And actually the struggle is for us to find ways of engaging with them.
And
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 you
and
cannot
this
do
is
that at election time.
where I was talking about strong, active,
Of course.
engaged riding association. People become cynical when they see canvassers once in only during the election time and not in between. But if there is constant engagement, if there's a sense that somebody heard them during those visits and followed up and developed some activity, some action, and went back to them to say, look, this is what we are doing. An email communique from the elected member, if there's an elected member, is just not enough. So I would like to see us think about functioning grassroots based uh, arrangements that communicate, connect with, and respond to people like in those one street apartments on a much more regular basis. So they know that somebody's hearing and somebody's trying to do something about it. The
Hey guys.
hopelessness comes when they feel, okay, 4 years, they came once and I won't see them again until the next campaign.
Nick over here has a question as well. I'm just gonna ask you
Thank you,
to unmute.
Karika.
Oh. Nick, if you don't mind unmuting yourself.
Oh, yeah, Lipa wanted to say something. I was going to say,
Oh, actually, Nick doesn't have a mic, so I'll just read it for him. So I'll put, he said, can we explore the idea of non-party members being able to vote in leadership elections to boost engagement?
Excellent question.
I have never thought about it before. So I'm new to the political party process. I knew that couldn't happen right now. So I'm curious, Alok, what you think and what Nick thinks.
Well, it, act- it there was a proposal not in the NDP, but in the Liberal Party when Bob Rae was the interim leader to open up the Liberal Party to people who were not members and create other categories like supporter, associate member, whatever, but give them the same rights to vote in the leadership uh, selection process as anybody else. It didn't happen. I don't believe the Liberal Party actually implemented his proposal, but it was done by Jeremy Corbyn and his predecessor in the Labour Party in UK. Those of you who will have followed this, the membership of Labour Party went up multifold when Corbyn's predecessor opened up the party to non-members. Young people joined by hundreds of thousands. That's who elected Corbyn. And what the irony is that Corbyn has now been expelled by a leadership that is rooted in the elite of the party. But once the party was opened up, it transformed the party and it elected a different kind of leader. So it's a very important question you have raised. And there's no reason why it cannot be done, except that it will take power away from those who are accustomed to having their voice prevail.
I want to give, I hope I'm saying your name right, Lipa, a chance. She as or Lipa has talked to me on internet and email about wanting to say something, and it might be controversial, but I've said no, it's a brave space. If this is your thoughts and it comes from your experience, please feel free to share it. So There you go. That
Hi,
there you
can
are.
you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to just make that statement that about coming together as people. I see like a lot of people are being pinned against one another by the news or what they read on social media, what their beliefs are about certain things, and to really make a change in the world, we must do it together and not stand on our own 2 feet and work together as a group. So I just wanted to say that no matter um, what we believe in or what we're going through, um, or what we read, is just to stick together and speak loud and clear to make a difference in the world, not to stay silent, and just for us to give each other a voice and not just our own selves. That's all.
But thank you. How do you say your name? Your first name?
Lepa
Leipa.
Osava.
Thank you, Leipa. Thank you for adding that. And thank you. I just wanted to make sure you had an opportunity. Is there, before we sign off, is there anybody else? Oliver, did you want to add something or you're okay? Good. Okay. Any final words, Alok, before I say goodbye to the who's left with us?
Well, not really, just that these are very important issues. I mean, often we have been so alienated from politics that we don't give it the um, attention and the importance that we ought to. And what Lepa said is very much germane to that, that the more voices are added together, the stronger the impact. And so organizing, there's an old saying, it is that educate, organize, agitate. And all three require people to be working together. And democracy renewal will not come without the three of them being implemented really, really seriously in a focused way. Educate, organize, agitate.
Thank you, Alok. It's an honor to have you here and honored to stand beside you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you, Kaurika. I know you had a long day. You worked all day and you're here still supporting me. Thank you. Kaurika's with the party. Good night, everyone. You'll see the next newsletter. Hopefully, Oliver, I'll get you the copy soon and people get the newsletter. If you want to participate in any way, if you're not in the campaign, email irwin.elman@ontarionDP.ca and there's a role for you. No matter what skill you have, what you can bring to the table, we're missing it. So please do. Good night, everyone. Wave goodbye.
Night.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Good night.